The morning shift at New Harbor Station ended like every other morning for the past 3 years. Calvin Porter clocked out at the freight dock, wiped the grease from his hands, and joined the river of workers flowing toward the main concourse. Thousands of beings moved through the massive transit hub every hour. Humans rubbed shoulders with tall Draxi merchants, short Plivik technicians, and dozens of other species Calvin had stopped trying to identify years ago. The station never slept. Vendors shouted from their stalls. Ships arrived and departed with mechanical precision. Money changed hands in 100 different currencies. Everyone had somewhere to go, something to do, someone to meet. Calvin kept his eyes forward and his pace steady. He had learned that rule early. Don't make eye contact. Don't slow down. Don't get involved. New Harbor attracted desperate people from across the galaxy, and if you stopped to help every beggar or con artist, you would never make it home. The skeletal figure had been there for weeks. Calvin noticed her the same way he noticed the coffee vendor on the 3rd level or the broken light panel near Gate 12. She was part of the background now. Another fixture of station life. Her violet skin had faded to an ugly gray color. She sat against a support pillar with 4 thin arms extended, holding a cracked plastic cup. Most people stepped around her without breaking stride. Calvin had passed her maybe 100 times. He never stopped. Nobody did. That morning should have been the same. He was tired. His back ached. He wanted to get home, eat something, and sleep for 10 hours. But as he approached the pillar where she always sat, something changed. She tried to stand. Her 4 arms pushed against the metal pillar. Her legs, impossibly thin beneath dirty clothing, shook with effort. She made it halfway up before they gave out. She crumpled like paper, her cup clattering across the floor. The sound was lost in the noise of the crowd. People stepped over her. Around her. One man nearly kicked her outstretched hand. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked down for more than a second. Calvin's feet stopped moving before his brain caught up. He stood in the middle of the flow of traffic while people muttered and moved around him. He stared at the fallen alien woman. At her trembling arms. At the way her chest heaved with each breath. Something in that moment cracked through 3 years of careful indifference. He pushed through the crowd and knelt beside her. Up close, she looked worse than he had thought. Her skin was not just gray but had a sickly texture. Her eyes, huge and dark, stared up at him with an expression he recognized. Fear. She expected him to hurt her. To take something. To mock her like others probably had. "Hey," Calvin said softly. "Can you hear me?" She nodded once. The movement looked like it took all her remaining strength. Calvin unscrewed his water canteen and held it toward her. "Drink this." Slowly. Her eyes widened. She looked at the canteen, then at his face, then back at the canteen. Her hand shook as she reached for it. She brought it to her lips and drank in tiny, desperate sips. Water ran down her chin. She did not seem to notice or care. "When did you last eat?" Calvin asked. She handed the canteen back. Her voice came out as a whisper. 5 days. Maybe 6. I lose track. 5 days. Calvin felt his stomach turn. "You haven't eaten anything in 5 days?" "No one stops," she said. "No one looks. I understand. They have their own problems. Their own lives. I am just another beggar." Calvin looked at her cup on the floor. A few small coins sat in the bottom. Not enough for a meal. Not enough for anything. He looked up at the thousands of people streaming past. Rich traders. Successful merchants. Station workers like himself. All too busy to care about one starving alien. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra." "I'm Calvin." He stood and offered his hand. "Can you stand if I help you?" She stared at his hand like it might vanish if she touched it. "Why are you helping me?" Calvin did not have a good answer to that question. He had walked past her 100 times. What made today different? Why did he stop this time when he never stopped before? "I don't know," he admitted. "But I did stop. So let me help." Lyra took his hand with one of hers. Her skin felt cold and dry like paper. Calvin pulled her up carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Her legs shook but held. She stood maybe a head shorter than him. "There's a food court on this level," Calvin said. "Come on. Let me get you something to eat." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. They ran down her gray cheeks and dripped onto the floor. "You do not have to do this." "I know I don't have to," Calvin said. "But I'm going to anyway. Can you walk?" She nodded and took a shaky step. Calvin stayed close in case she fell. They moved through the crowd together. People stared now. Calvin felt their eyes. Heard the whispers. A human helping a beggar. How unusual. How strange. Some looked disgusted. Others looked curious. Most looked away quickly and kept walking. The food court appeared ahead. Bright signs advertised meals from a dozen worlds. The smell of cooking food filled the air. Calvin guided Lyra to a vendor that sold simple grain bowls. The kind of thing most species could eat safely. 2 bowls, Calvin told the vendor. With protein. The vendor, a heavy-set human woman, looked at Lyra with obvious distaste. You sure about this? 2 bowls, Calvin repeated. His voice carried an edge now. With protein. The woman shrugged and prepared the food. Calvin paid with his credit chip. He led Lyra to a small table away from the main crowd. He set the bowl in front of her. Lyra stared at the food. Her 4 hands gripped the edge of the table. Fresh tears ran down her face. I cannot pay you back. I'm not asking you to, Calvin said. Why? Lyra whispered. Why did you stop? Why do you care? Calvin looked at the bowl of food. At this starving alien woman. At 3 years of walking past people who needed help because it was easier than getting involved. He thought about the person he used to be before he came to New Harbor. Before he learned to stop caring. Because somebody should, he said finally. Eat your food, Lyra. We can figure out the rest after. Lyra ate slowly at first. Each spoonful seemed to take tremendous effort. Her 4 hands trembled as she brought the food to her mouth. Calvin watched her carefully, concerned she might make herself sick if she ate too fast. But after the 3rd bite something changed. She began to sob. Not quiet tears like before. Deep, shaking sobs that made her whole body convulse. Food fell from her spoon back into the bowl. People at nearby tables turned to stare. Calvin saw their judgmental looks. Their whispered comments. He ignored them all. It's okay, he said quietly. Take your time. I forgot, Lyra gasped between sobs. I forgot what real food tastes like. I forgot the feeling of not being hungry. I forgot what it feels like when someone shows kindness. She wiped at her face with one hand while the others clutched the bowl like someone might take it away. I forgot I was a person. Calvin felt something twist in his chest. He had complained about station food 1,000 times. Called it bland. Overpriced. Boring. He had never once felt grateful just to have it. Never once thought about what it meant to go without. Where are you from? He asked. Lyra took another bite and swallowed. Her voice grew steadier as food reached her system. A colony called Xylath Prime. It was beautiful once. We had cities built into the trees. Schools. Libraries. Art centers. I taught literature to young children. I had a home. A family. She paused and stared into her bowl. Then the war came. What war? The Krell expansion, Lyra said. The name came out bitter. They wanted our system. We tried to negotiate. We tried to surrender. They did not care. They burned our cities. Destroyed our orbital stations. Millions died in the first week. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I got my daughter onto an evacuation ship. I was supposed to follow on the next one. But there was no next one. The ships stopped coming. Calvin said nothing. What could anyone say to that? I waited 3 months in the ruins, Lyra continued. Eating whatever I could find. Hiding from Krell patrols. Finally, a smuggler's ship came looking for salvage. I traded everything I had left for passage. He dropped me here at New Harbor. Said it was a place where people could start over. She laughed without humor. He did not mention you need papers. Documentation. Legal status. Things that burned with my world. You tried to get papers? Calvin asked. I tried everything, Lyra said. I went to the colonial administration. They said I needed proof of identity. Birth records. Education certificates. Anything official. All of that is gone. Destroyed. They said without proof they could not help me. I went to refugee services. They said they were overloaded. I could apply but the wait was 18 months. I went to employment offices. They said no papers means no work. Legal work anyway. She finished her first bowl and looked at it longingly. Calvin stood without a word and bought her another. When he returned, she stared at the second bowl like it was a miracle. I am a teacher, Lyra said quietly. I have 2 university degrees. I speak 4 languages. I published research on ancient Xylath poetry. On my world I was respected. Valued. Here I am invisible. Less than invisible. I am something people step over on their way to somewhere important. Calvin thought about his own story. His own reasons for coming to New Harbor 3 years ago. Running from a failed marriage. A daughter who would not speak to him. A life that fell apart piece by piece until there was nothing left worth staying for. He came here to disappear. To start over where nobody knew his name or his mistakes. I understand more than you think, Calvin said. Starting over. Trying to rebuild when everything falls apart. It's not the same as what you went through. I know that. But I understand feeling lost. Lyra looked at him with those huge dark eyes. Really looked at him for the first time. Why did you stop today? You passed me before. Many times. I saw you. You never stopped before. Calvin had been asking himself the same question. I don't know. Maybe I was finally ready to stop being the kind of person who walks past. Maybe I got tired of being alone in a crowd of thousands. Maybe I just had a moment of being human instead of being another station worker going through the motions. They sat in silence for a moment. The noise of the food court surrounded them. Vendors calling out specials. Children laughing. The clatter of trays and dishes. Normal life happening all around two people who had fallen through the cracks. What will you do now? Calvin asked. Tonight, I mean. Where will you go? Lyra looked down. Back to my pillar. It is sheltered from the wind. I have a blanket hidden nearby. It is not much, but it is what I have. Calvin made a decision before he fully thought it through. The kind of decision that would change things. The kind he had spent 3 years avoiding. I have a storage unit converted into living space. Nothing fancy. The company lets dock workers rent them cheap. It has a bed, a bathroom, climate control. You can stay there tonight. Lyra's spoon clattered into her bowl. I cannot ask that of you. You're not asking. I'm offering. You do not know me. I could be dangerous. I could steal from you. Calvin almost smiled. You weigh about 90 pounds and can barely stand. I'll take my chances. Besides, you're not going to steal anything. I can tell. How can you tell? Because you cried over a bowl of grain, Calvin said. Because you feel ashamed of needing help instead of angry about needing it. Because you still say please and thank you to a stranger who should have helped you weeks ago. That's how I can tell. Lyra's hands covered her face. Her shoulders shook again. I do not deserve this kindness. Everyone deserves kindness, Calvin said. That's the whole point. Look, it's just for tonight. We can figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. Right now you need sleep somewhere safe. I happen to have somewhere safe. It's that simple. It was not that simple. Calvin knew it. Lyra knew it. But sometimes simple lies feel better than complicated truths. Sometimes you need to pretend things are simple just to get through to the next day. Okay, Lyra whispered. Thank you, Calvin. Thank you. They finished eating in comfortable silence. Two broken people sharing a meal. The beginning of something neither of them expected. The start of an unlikely friendship between a man trying to find himself and a woman trying to survive. 3 weeks passed like water finding its level. Calvin fell into a new routine without quite realizing it. He woke early, worked his shift at the freight dock, and stopped at the food court before heading to his storage unit. He always bought 2 meals. Sometimes Lyra waited by the door. Other times she was inside and he could hear her moving around before he entered. The change in her appearance amazed him. Her violet skin had returned to its proper color. Her arms no longer looked like they might snap. She moved with grace instead of desperation. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The fear had faded. Something else had replaced it. Dignity maybe. Or hope. On the 5th day, Calvin came home to find his storage unit transformed. The clothes he usually left in piles were folded neatly. His tools hung organized on the wall. The small kitchen area actually looked clean. Even his bed was made, something he had not bothered with in months. You didn't have to do this, Calvin said, setting down their dinner. Lyra stood near the back wall, her 4 hands clasped together nervously. I could not just sit here all day. You give me food, shelter, safety. I must give something back. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything, Lyra said firmly. On my world we have a saying. A debt of life can only be repaid with life. You did not just give me food that first day. You gave me my life back. So I will work. I will contribute. I will not be a burden. Calvin wanted to argue but saw the determination in her face. This mattered to her. Taking this away would hurt more than help. Okay. But you're not a burden. Just so we're clear on that. Over meals they talked. Lyra told him about SCI-FI culture. How they valued community above individual success. How their art focused on collaboration rather than single artists. How teaching was considered the highest calling because it shaped future generations. She spoke about her daughter with careful words, never saying whether she thought the girl was alive or dead. Some hopes were too fragile to speak aloud. Calvin shared his own story in pieces. The divorce that came after years of working too much and caring too little. his daughter Amy, who stopped returning his calls. The realization that he had built a successful career and a failed life. Coming to New Harbor was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it became a place to hide. "You are not hiding now," Lyra observed one evening. "Helping me? That is not hiding." "Maybe," Calvin admitted. "Or maybe I'm just tired of being alone." On the 15th day, Calvin brought home a stack of papers from the Colonial Administration office. He spread them across the small table while Lyra watched with growing concern. "I did some research," Calvin said, "about getting you legal status. It's complicated." "How complicated?" Calvin pointed at the first form. "To get a work permit, you need documented proof of employment. To get employment, you need a work permit. It's a circle with no entrance." "I know," Lyra said quietly. "I tried before. They told me the same thing." "There's refugee status," Calvin continued. "But that requires sponsorship from an established business. And proof of persecution. And background checks that need documents we don't have. The waiting list is 2 years minimum." "2 years," Lyra repeated. She looked at the papers like they were a prison sentence. "What am I supposed to do for 2 years? Beg at the station again? Hide in your storage unit forever?" Calvin felt anger building in his chest. Not at Lyra. At the system. At the bureaucrats who designed forms without thinking about real people. At the galaxy that created millions of refugees and then punished them for existing. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Lyra said. "I know this. I have known this since I arrived. The system is not designed to help people like me. It is designed to make us disappear." Calvin spent his lunch breaks for the next week asking questions. He talked to other dock workers who had hired undocumented labor before. He visited the legal aid office and got useless advice about patience and proper channels. He even asked his supervisor if the freight company had any sponsorship programs. They did not. Then he remembered Susan. Susan Brennan ran a small translation service from an office 2 levels down from the main concourse. Calvin had helped her move some equipment years ago and they had stayed friendly. She specialized in commercial contracts, helping traders navigate deals across language barriers. Business was good, but she was always complaining about being understaffed. Calvin stopped by her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Susan looked up from her desk covered in data pads and physical papers. She was maybe 50 with gray hair tied back and glasses that made her eyes look huge. "Calvin Porter," she said with a smile. "You need something translated, or you finally ready to ask me out?" "Neither," Calvin said. "I need a favor. A big one." He explained Lyra's situation. Her languages. Her education. Her complete lack of legal status. Susan listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "You're asking me to hire someone with no papers," Susan said finally. "That's illegal. If immigration finds out, I could lose my business license. Maybe face criminal charges." "I know," Calvin said. "I wouldn't ask if I had another option. How well do you know this woman?" 3 weeks, you said? That's not very long." "Long enough," Calvin said. "She's brilliant. Educated. She just needs a chance." Susan drummed her fingers on her desk. "Bring her by tomorrow. Let me talk to her. If she's as smart as you say, I might be able to use her. But this stays unofficial. No contracts. Cash payments. She works from your place or somewhere private. If anyone asks, she's a consultant I hire occasionally." "Understood." Relief flooded through Calvin. "Understood. Thank you, Susan." "Really?" "Don't thank me yet," Susan said. "This is risky for everyone. But I remember what it's like to need help and have no one offer it. So we'll try. See what happens." Calvin told Lyra that evening. She sat on the edge of the bed and cried again. But these were different tears. Not despair. Not hunger. Something else entirely. Hope. 2 months felt like a lifetime and no time at all. Lyra worked from Calvin's storage unit, translating commercial contracts for Susan. The work came steadily. Traders needed documents converted from SCI-FI dialects into Common Standard. Businesses wanted their proposals adapted for alien markets. Lyra handled everything with quick efficiency and careful attention to detail. She earned enough to insist on paying Calvin rent. He refused at first, but she was stubborn. They compromised. She bought groceries and cooked meals from SCI-FI recipes adapted for human ingredients. Calvin discovered he liked food that actually had flavor. They fell into an easy rhythm. Work, meals, conversation. 2 people who had been alone learning how to not be alone anymore. Calvin should have known it was too good to last. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Calvin was supervising a cargo transfer when his comm device buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Is this Calvin Porter? A woman's voice. Official sounding. Cool. Yeah. Who's this? Colonial Security Station 7. We have a Lyra of Xylath Prime in custody. She listed you as an emergency contact. Calvin's blood turned to ice. What? Why is she in custody? Random documentation sweep. She has no legal status. She's being processed for deportation to a neutral holding facility. You can visit during standard hours if you want to say goodbye. The line went dead. Calvin dropped the data pad he was holding. His supervisor yelled something, but Calvin was already running. He sprinted through the station corridors, pushing past crowds, ignoring the protests. Security Station 7 was on the lower levels. A place most people avoided. Where the station dealt with its problems out of sight. The detention center looked exactly like what it was. Gray walls. Harsh lights. Guards with weapons and bored expressions. Calvin approached the front desk, trying to control his panic. I need to see Lyra. Xylath woman. She was brought in today. The guard barely looked up. Visiting hours start at 1800. Come back then. I need to see her now. Come back at 1800. Calvin wanted to grab the man and shake him. Instead, he forced his voice to stay level. Please. I need to know what's happening. What are the charges? The guard sighed like Calvin was wasting his time. No charges. She's undocumented. Automatic deportation. Standard procedure. Deportation where? Processing Station Gamma. Neutral territory. She can apply for asylum from there. Calvin knew about Processing Station Gamma. Everyone did. It was where the galaxy sent refugees it did not want to deal with. A massive orbital facility with no real government. No rules. No protection. People went there and disappeared. Some died from disease. Some from violence. Some just from despair. How long until she's transferred? Deportation hearing is tomorrow at 1400 hours. If the judge approves, she'll be on a transport by tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours. Calvin left the detention center and immediately called Susan. She answered on the second ring. Calvin? What's wrong? He explained everything in a rush. The detention. The deportation. The processing station. Susan listened without interrupting. There has to be something we can do, Calvin said. Some legal option. There is one, Susan said slowly. Sponsorship. If you can prove she's essential to a legitimate business, you can file emergency papers. But Calvin, you don't own a business. Then I'll start one. How long does it take? To register a business entity? A few hours if you pay the rush fees. But that's just paperwork. You need to prove the business is real. Show contracts. Revenue. Evidence she's been working for you. The immigration judges aren't stupid. They'll know if you're just trying to game the system. Calvin thought fast. What if we made it real? You've been paying Lyra for 2 months. We have records of that work. What if I register a consultation firm and you transfer those contracts to my business retroactively? That's technically legal, Susan admitted. Businesses transfer contracts all the time. But it's still obvious what we're doing. The judge might not accept it. It's better than nothing, Calvin said. Will you help me? Of course I'll help you. Get to the business registration office now. I'll start pulling together every contract Lyra worked on. Every payment record. Every communication. We'll build the strongest case we can. Calvin spent the rest of the day drowning in paperwork. Business registration forms. Tax identification numbers. Operating licenses. Everything cost money and everything took time he did not have. He paid every rush fee available. Burned through his savings without thinking twice. By midnight, Porter Consultation Services officially existed. On paper at least. Susan arrived at his storage unit at 2 in the morning with 3 other people Calvin barely knew. A lawyer named Gerald who did immigration work. A dock worker named Tom who Lyra had helped with a family emergency. A trader named Yuki who Lyra had translated a major contract for. They worked through the night. Building a case. Creating a narrative. Lyra was not just an undocumented refugee. She was a skilled professional providing essential services. She had value. She had worth. She deserved to stay. Calvin finally got to see Lyra at 8 in the morning. She sat in a small visiting room behind reinforced glass. She looked small. Frightened. When she saw him, tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry, she said through the speaker system. I was careful. I stayed inside like we planned. But I needed soap. I went to the store and they were checking everyone. I should have been more careful. This isn't your fault, Calvin said. None of this is your fault. Listen to me. We're fighting this. I registered a business. We have sponsorship papers. We have a hearing this afternoon. Calvin, you don't have to do this. You've done enough already. I'm not done, Calvin said. Not even close. You're not going to that processing station. I won't let that happen. The system doesn't care what you want. Then we'll make it care, Calvin said. We have a lawyer. We have evidence. We have people willing to testify about your work. We're going to walk into that hearing and prove you belong here. Lyra pressed one hand against the glass. Why are you doing this? Calvin pressed his hand against the glass opposite hers. Because somebody should. Remember? The hearing was at 2. Calvin stood outside the immigration court with Susan, Gerald, and the others. They had 12 hours of preparation for a fight that would decide everything. A tired judge would spend maybe 30 minutes deciding if Lyra lived or died. Ready? Gerald asked. Calvin took a deep breath. Let's go prove she matters. The immigration courtroom was smaller than Calvin expected. Gray walls. Fluorescent lights. Chairs that had seen better days. Judge Patricia Okonkwo sat behind a raised desk reviewing documents on a data screen. She looked tired. Calvin wondered how many cases like this she saw every week. How many desperate people. How many impossible situations. Lyra sat at a small table with Gerald the lawyer. She wore clean clothes Susan had brought. Her violet skin looked healthy but her eyes showed fear. Across from them sat a colonial prosecutor named Webb. A thin man with a permanent frown who treated deportation hearings like a grocery list. Next case. Next case. Next case. Judge Okonkwo looked up. Case number 7492. Lyra of Xylath Prime. Undocumented alien facing deportation. I see we have a last-minute sponsorship filing. Mr. Webb, your position? Webb stood. Your Honor, this is clearly a fraudulent arrangement. Mr. Porter registered his business yesterday. Less than 24 hours before this hearing. The timing is obviously designed to circumvent immigration law. Mr. Gerald? The judge said. Gerald stood slowly. Your Honor, the timing is not suspicious. It's necessary. Ms. Lyra has been working as a translator for 2 months through Ms. Susan Brennan's company. Mr. Porter saw an opportunity to expand into consultation services and properly formalize that relationship. We have contracts, payment records, and testimonials proving Ms. Lyra's value. Value is not the question, Webb said. The law is clear. Undocumented aliens must be processed through proper channels. We cannot allow people to simply create businesses overnight to avoid deportation. It sets a dangerous precedent. Judge Okonkwo studied her screen. I'm looking at these contracts. They're dated back 8 weeks. Ms. Brennan, you're listed as the original contracting party. Can you explain? Susan stood from the audience section. Yes, Your Honor. I run a translation service. I hired Lyra informally to help with overflow work. When Calvin decided to start his consultation firm, we transferred those contracts to his company. It's a standard business practice. Informal hiring means illegal employment, Webb said. Ms. Brennan just admitted to breaking the law. I admitted to helping someone who deserved help, Susan said. Her voice carried an edge now. I admitted to choosing human decency over bureaucratic cruelty. Order, Judge Okonkwo said quietly. Ms. Brennan, please sit. Mr. Porter, I'd like to hear from you directly. Did you create this business specifically to sponsor Ms. Lyra? Calvin stood. His hands were shaking. He had practiced what to say all morning. Gerald had coached him on the right words. The safe words. The words that might convince a judge. But standing there looking at Lyra's frightened face, all those careful words disappeared. Yes, Calvin said. I created the business to save her. Gerald made a small sound of distress. Webb smiled. Judge Okonkwo's expression did not change. Your Honor, he just admitted fraud, Webb said. Let him finish, the judge said. Mr. Porter? Calvin took a breath. I met Lyra 3 months ago. She was starving at the transit station. I'd walked past her 100 times before. Everyone did. She was just another problem. Another beggar. Another person it was easier to ignore. But that day I stopped. I gave her food. I gave her shelter. And I learned her story. He pointed at Lyra. She's not a criminal. She's not trying to cheat the system. She's a war refugee. Her world was destroyed. Her family was killed or scattered. She came here with nothing because she had nothing left. And our system told her that wasn't good enough. She needed papers, documents, proof, things that burned with her cities. Mr. Porter, I understand your compassion, Judge Okonkwo said, but we have processes for refugees, applications, procedures. Procedures that take 2 years, Calvin said. What was she supposed to do for 2 years? Starve? Freeze? Die in some alley while waiting for the right form to get processed? Your Honor, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the legal arguments. But I know this. The law should protect people. It should help them. Not condemn them to death for losing paperwork in a war. The courtroom was silent. Webb looked annoyed. Gerald looked worried. Judge Okonkwo's face was unreadable. So yes, Calvin continued, I created the business to sponsor her. But it's not fraud. The work is real. The contracts are real. The value she provides is real. Yuki Trading almost lost a $1 million credit deal because of translation errors. Lyra fixed it in 3 hours. Tom Hendricks got emergency messages from his family on Proxima. Lyra translated them when no one else could. She's helped dozens of people. She's good at what she does. She deserves to be here. Calvin sat down. His heart was pounding. He had probably just destroyed any chance they had. Gerald put his head in his hands. Judge Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her screen. At the documents. At Lyra. At Calvin. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Mr. Webb, she said finally. You're right. The timing is suspicious. The business creation is obviously connected to the detention. But Mr. Porter is also right. The work appears to be legitimate. The testimonials are strong. And I'm tired of sending refugees to processing station Gamma to die. Webb started to object, but the judge held up her hand. Sponsorship approved, Judge Okonkwo said. Conditional work permit granted for 1 year. Ms. Lyra will report monthly to Immigration Services. Mr. Porter's business will be subject to quarterly audits. If everything remains legitimate, we'll review for permanent status next year. If there's any evidence of fraud, the permit is revoked immediately. Understood. Yes, Your Honor, Gerald said quickly. Thank you, Your Honor. Calvin could not speak, could not move. Lyra was crying silently at the table. Ms. Lyra, the judge said. Welcome to New Harbor. Officially this time. Try to stay out of trouble. 6 months later, Calvin sat in the back of a small classroom space Susan had helped them rent. 12 SCI-FI children sat in a circle on the floor. Lyra stood in the center, her 4 arms moving as she spoke in her native language. She was teaching them traditional stories, songs, the history their parents feared they would forget. Porter Consultation Services had grown beyond what Calvin imagined. They handled translation work across 40 languages now. Employed 6 people. 3 of them were refugees Lyra had found and trained. The business was real, profitable, meaningful. But this was what mattered most. These children learning who they were, where they came from. Lyra giving them the gift her own daughter never received. The gift of remembering. One of the children asked a question. Lyra laughed and answered. Her violet skin glowed healthy in the warm light. Her eyes held no fear now. No desperation. Just joy. Purpose. Belonging. She glanced toward the back and saw Calvin watching. She smiled. That same cautious smile from their first meeting. But transformed. Brighter. Fuller. Real. Calvin smiled back. He thought about the man he was 3 months ago. Walking past suffering because it was easier. Hiding from connection because connection meant risk. That man was gone. In his place was someone who knew the truth. Helping one person does not fix the galaxy's problems. But it fixes that person's problem. And sometimes that's enough. Lyra turned back to her students. Calvin stayed in his chair. Watching someone he helped save now helping others. Watching the ripples spread from one small act of stopping. Of caring. Of refusing to accept that cruelty was normal. The children began to sing. Lyra's voice joined theirs. An old SCI-FI song about stars and home and hope. Calvin did not understand the words. But he understood what they meant. They meant someone cared enough to teach them. Someone survived to pass them on. They meant that sometimes, in a galaxy full of indifference, one person choosing to care could change everything.